Prohibition by A.J. Eliot, Benjamin York, Eric Nelson, and James Tyree, and Zach. Early America. The Mayflower carried more beer than water. George Washington was the first major distiller of whiskey in the U.S. After the Revolutionary War, the government used liquor as a way to raise money. During the Civil War, the government was able to tax alcohol. But what happens when America breaks the mold and changes history by banning alcohol? The government had the responsibility to enforce prohibition, but they failed to protect the rights of the individual. As a result, the economy suffered, crime rate rose, and people's rights to certain health and living standards were not met. Death was caused by gang fights, and it was also caused by people drinking highly dangerous amounts because sometimes the alcohol was made in unsafe ways. Domestic abuse was a huge problem before Prohibition. Men were abusing their wives and children. There were approximately 100 deaths from this time due to alcohol poisoning. Slums were places in cities where alcohol was very common, and there was a lot of crime there, beginning of temperance. In 1840, the Washingtonian was a group that was similar to AAA today. Men joined this in order to get cured from their alcohol addictions. The churches claimed it to be ungodly and have no ties to religion. The church considered a lot of these organizations to be unholy because they were able to denounce alcohol without accepting God. In 1873, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was involved in schools and basically represented women's stand against alcohol. Women's role in society at this time was very minimal, and temperance was the first step on the road to equal rights. Schools taught kids the evils of alcohol at this time, and they were taught ridiculous facts like, if you have one drink of alcohol, you will get addicted. Maine shooting. When a group of protesters that didn't want Prohibition acted up, they were shot at by officials. The Whirlwind was a group of religious women that prayed and sang songs outside of bars. People didn't like them, so when they walked by, they would curse and throw things at them. After Kansas banned alcohol, Carrie Nation went into bars with an axe and destroyed them, since people in Kansas thought that banning alcohol would cause less harm. Beginning of bootlegging. People sold alcohol on the streets that they kept in secret compartments. These compartments included hollowed-out books, thigh flasks, and by using hollowed-out canes and other secret compartments in clothing. Alcohol was first made illegal in the state of Maine. That's when smuggling began. Ships were taken from Canada to Maine with alcohol on board. People also drove from Maine to Canada smuggling alcohol. There were several ways around the law. The law never prohibited the consumption and possession. Bartenders sold expensive crackers and sardines and gave away a free glass of alcohol to go with it. Alcohol could be bought from pharmacies and churches. Actions the government took. The government destroyed the alcohol. They attempted to stop the bootlegging. How they failed. The government attempted to enforce prohibition. However, the police rarely enforced the laws. In fact, cops were regularly paid off by the bootleggers to accompany them while they deliver the alcohol to its destination. The outcome of prohibition was that people became bootleggers. Citizens were hurt physically and financially. The alcohol sometimes contained dangerous ingredients, and through bootlegging, dangerous gangs were formed and there were corrupt police. Economy. Prohibition caused a downfall in many businesses across America. Bars and restaurants were hit the hardest since they relied on the alcohol to bring in customers and money the most. Over 1,000 jobs were lost from bars closing alone. Jobs such as barrel makers, waiters, and truck drivers were also lost. Many states relied on the sale of alcohol to produce money. 75% of New York's money in taxes came from selling alcohol. It cost the federal government $11 billion in revenue. plus the fact that over $300 million were spent to enforce the effort to stop the production of illegal alcohol. The Irish and the Italian mob competed for one of the major bootlegging cities, Chicago. The leader of the Italian mob was the notorious Al Capone. The Irish leader was Jaime Weiss. They had a brutal mob war that lasted 2 years. The Volstead Act had determined that alcohol used for medical purposes would be legal. This legal access was ignored by prohibition agents. This left pharmacists, doctors, and their patients to enjoy alcohol free from guilt and the law. Over 1 million gallons of prescribed alcohol was sold each year. Doctors prescribed it and pharmacists sold it at incredible rates. George Remus was the wealthiest and perhaps cleverest bootlegger of all. Knowing that prohibition was soon to take effect, Remus used his savings to buy whiskey certificates and distilleries. As a lawyer, he knew that the certificates would allow him to operate within the law. Remus's alcohol was stated for medical and industrial purposes alike. He had the full right to sell the alcohol. Whatever happened to it after it left his hands was not his concern. The alcohol was filtered through drug companies Remus owned. Some of the alcohol was used for medicine, but the majority of it was spread throughout bootleggers, speakeasy owners, and private clientele. A speakeasy is an illegal liquor store or nightclub. He made millions off this selling of legal alcohol. Prohibition agents targeted men like Remus unsuccessfully. By the end of Prohibition, there were only 2,836 Prohibition agents in the U.S. Most agents were ill-trained. In Big, there was little attempt to enforce Prohibition laws by police. Juries refused to convict Prohibition violators. The police also reserved money from the bootleggers and the mobs to turn a blind eye on this illegal activity. In only a 3-year period, corrupt city officials in Philadelphia made $3 million. It was almost useless to arrest customers and speakeasy owners because it did not stop the alcohol at the source. Information had to be gathered using primitive surveillance techniques. Wire-linked microphones were put into lampshades at speakeasies. The bugs were monitored around the clock by stenographers. This method did lead to arrests, but people in the speakeasies soon found out about these methods and spread misinformation. Isidore Einstein and Moe Smith were 2 Prohibition agents. Working as a team, they managed to arrest a record of 4,392 people. Izzy and Moe would stop at nothing to get the job done. Their antics were outrageous, but successful. They dressed as women or impersonated street cleaners, tourists, or working-class stiffs to infiltrate speakeasies. Izzy once impersonated himself, telling a bartender, "I, Izzy Einstein, the Prohibition agent." The bartender merely laughed, served him a drink, and was arrested. The 2 agents were very popular with the public and the press. However, they were constantly criticized by their superiors for their unorthodox methods. As their popularity spread, so did jealousy from other agents. In 1925, both men were fired. Since the government had failed to protect the rights of the individual, Prohibition failed. The government had not taken the responsibilities it needed to enforce it. The government attempted lots of actions that all ended in failure. Bans on alcohol started bootlegging, which never would have even happened if it weren't for Prohibition. It hurt the economy by closing breweries and saloons. It increased the crime rate in the United States. Since the amendment was repealed, Today, $2 billion are spent on advertisements today on the television, billboards, and arenas and